In this video, I'm going to show you how to build your own log store from cheap or free materials. The majority of this log store is made from pallet wood, which I picked up for free. First thing I did was to come up with a design to fit the space that I had available using SketchUp, and then I used this to work from. I got myself some free pallets and crates from Facebook Marketplace, which are going to make up the bulk of this project. You could even make this whole log store from just pallet wood if you wanted to. I'm starting by cutting down all of the pallet wood to the lengths that I need for my design. My log store is going to be 40 centimeters deep, 120 centimeters wide and around 1.5 meters tall, with a sloping roof from right to left. With all of the pieces cut to size, I can then start to assemble the base. I'm using the stringers from a couple of pallets that I picked up, which will act as the main base of the log store. A couple of these were slightly thicker than the others, so I just ripped them to size on the bandsaw to give a flat base. I oiled the stringers where they're going to be in contact with the ground, just to give them a little bit of extra protection from water. I could then assemble the base by gluing and brad nailing the pallet wood onto the stringers, leaving a small gap between for airflow. If you don't have a brad nailer, you can nail these by hand with a hammer or use screws. The glue I'm using on these is Gorilla Glue, which should be nice and strong. The nails are only really holding it in place whilst the glue cures. With all the base assembled, I test fitted it just to make sure that it fit the space okay, and then I gave it a coat of paint. I put this to one side to dry, and then I started on the side pieces. I'm using 2 lengths of 3x2 CLS timber, which are then joined together using the 40 centimeter pieces of pallet wood. Each side is constructed individually, with one being slightly taller than the other to allow for the slope in the roof. I used a spacer to keep the boards evenly spaced, and again I glued and brad nailed these together, this time just using exterior wood glue. The front of the slats are flush with the 3x2s, and then the back has an overhang of around 24 millimeters, which is the thickness of my back slats. This is to hide the ends of the back slats when viewing this from the side. You can see this here. With these 2 pieces assembled, I could give these both a coat of paint, and then I left the glue to cure and the paint to dry and started to pre-drill the holes on the back slats, which will be screwed on. I actually decided to add some screws into the side pieces just to give them a little bit of extra strength. Next up, I could attach the side pieces to the base. I'm using glue and pocket holes for this. And then I added a few right angle brackets, partly because I happen to have them to hand, partly for added strength, and then partly just to keep things a bit more square. I can then start joining the side pieces together with the back slats. You can see the overhang on the side slats, which the back slats then butt up to. I'm gluing and screwing these back slats on for added strength. You could glue and brad nail these pieces too, but until the glue dries, the whole log store would be pretty flimsy. Once the glue dries with the screws in place, the whole thing is going to be plenty strong enough. I'm adding a central upright into the middle of the back slats just to add a little bit more strength and to prevent these from potentially sagging over time. I'm using a 3x2 for this, but this could easily be another piece of pallet wood. I made sure both ends were square to the base, and then I just screwed this upright in place. No need to pre-drill this time, as the middle of the board is much less likely to split than the ends. With the main structure assembled, I could mark the angle of the roof pitch to cut the 3x2 timber at an angle to house the roof. I just clamped a straight edge from the highest point to the lowest point and then marked the lines for the cuts. I finished up for the night by giving everything a good coat of paint. In the morning, I cut the middle 3x2 at the angle that I'd marked previously, and then I actually ended up just sanding the 4 end pieces, as it would have been quite hard to cut these as I didn't actually leave them oversized. I then lifted the log store into its near final location to allow me to keep working on it. I'm adding the final top slat to the side and the back, which I'd left until the roof pitch had been cut. This was just to make sure that these pieces fit without cutting them. Thankfully they did, so I got these fitted. I wanted to add a shelf to this log store for kindling. We've got 2 other log stores in the garden, one just being for logs and the other is an old coal shed. And the kindling usually just ends up on the floor of this, just in bags. And sometimes it's a nightmare to get to, so I added a purpose-built shelf to make accessing the kindling much easier. I just used 2 lengths of CLS for this and will add slats for the shelf base. Next up was to work on the roof. Originally I was going to use feather edge boards for this, and I was going to make these on the bandsaw from some of the free wood from the crates. I even made up a few test pieces which actually look pretty good, but I decided these probably were going to warp a bit. So I popped into B&Q and I found this chipboard in the offcuts bay for a couple of quid. So I used this for the main roof structure. I'll then cover this using a roofing sheet. I painted the edges of this with some damp-proof paint just to prevent any moisture potentially being soaked up from the ends. I couldn't find any old brushes for this, so I just used one of these small brushes initially, but then I found an old paint pad, so I used this to paint the whole piece of chipboard with the DPM paint. Whilst the DPM paint was drying, I added the slats for the kindling shelf. These all fit nicely against the back, apart from the central piece, which was wider than the 3x2 upright. So I ripped this down on the bandsaw just to make it fit a bit better. These slats are being left unpainted, so I gave them a quick sand and wax oil just to make them look a little bit nicer. You won't really see these once the wood is all in, but the contrast between the black and the warm tones of the wood is nice when it's empty. With the shelf complete, I could then glue and screw the roof base on. I then marked up the size for the roofing sheet and I cut this down using an old saw with some WD-40 to lubricate it. To fit the roof sheet, I used some tech screws because I had loads of them left over from the garden room build. These aren't really meant for the bitumen type roof sheets, these are more for metal roof sheets, but I thought with the washer on they're probably going to be fine and watertight. I then added some of the black plastic caps just to finish this off nicely. The log store was now functionally complete, and if you wanted to you could leave it as it stands, but I wanted to add some trim just to hide the ends of the side slats. I put a piece on the front shelf which is slightly set back, and then I temporarily pinned a piece to the top and the bottom, which I then used as a guide to mark the angles for the two side trims. I then cut these to length and at the right angle and fitted these. I can then remove the top and the bottom pieces and refit them permanently with glue and brad nails. I added angled cuts to the top pieces from the overhang of the roof to the top of the side trim outer edges. Then all that was left to do was to paint the trims and touch up a few areas, and then the log store was done. I'm really happy with how this turned out. I only spent about £60 on this, and I could have made this for near enough free if I hadn't painted it and if I'd have used pallet wood instead of the 3x2s and the roofing sheet. This log store is just outside our back door, so now we don't have to walk all the way down the garden for wood when the weather is less than ideal. And we've finally got somewhere to keep all the kindling. If you've enjoyed this video, please check some more out on the channel. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.